Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Verena Blyle. I am CEO of Maple Counseling, and we are very honored and thrilled to invite you all into an evening of great learning and sharing, which we have called Healing the Community, New Approaches to Trauma Recovery. It's being taught by Doctors Ronald Alexander, Bonnie Goldstein, and Elijah Goldstein. And I have to give them credit because they reached out to me as soon as the fires were happening and saying, what can we do? So this course is dedicated to all those who have been impacted by the LA fires recently. And may this promote more and more healing for all those that need it now and moving on. So I have to thank, of course, all of the presenters, Bonnie, Ron, Elijah, thank you. You have generously donated tonight's time and your expertise, so that 100% goes to the heart of LA. Maple does have other CE courses, and I invite you all to go to our website and check them out. And we do normally charge a pretty nominal fee. And we are blessed with presenters such as this that donate their time when they do so. But this one's for the heart. And everything that we do raise through these CE courses otherwise goes to benefit Maple's mission in the community, which is providing free and low-fee therapy to predominantly low-income individuals while training the next generation of mental health practitioners. And now, thanks to Maple's new CE courses, it's also training professional clinicians alike. So welcome all of you that are here today. And all of Maple's CE courses are generally hosted by Lifespan Learning Institute. So thank you, Lifespan. And this is a free course tonight, so I do invite you to donate anything if you feel so called to Maple Counseling to support our mission. So with that, I want to do a brief overview of what you can expect in tonight's course. It's only 1 hour. Each presenter is going to share their learnings for about 15 minutes. And then it's going to have a Q&A at the very end, also around 15 minutes. So quick. And I want you all to understand how to do the Q&A. If you look down at the buttons at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see next to resources, the Q&A button. So just click it and type in your questions there. We're not always able to monitor the chat so much during the Q&A. So that is your best bet to make sure I see it because I will be moderating. So that's where I'll be looking. So again, very bottom Q&A button. And we might not be able to get to everyone, but we'll try to do our best. The course is going to end around 8 o'clock. It is being recorded. So feel free to step aside if you need to and know that you're going to be receiving a recording via email after this course is over, I'm assuming around tomorrow. So you can catch back up. All right. I now have the honor of introducing our esteemed presenters, and I'm going to do so all at once so that they can seamlessly move from one teaching to the next over the next hour. And I'm going to keep it brief because we don't have a lot of time with them, and they're extraordinary. If you want to know more about them and all of the incredible offerings they have, please go to the resources button, which is right there. You just click on it. There's 3 tabs at the top. So there's important links that are relating to this course and to our presenters. And there's documents. So you slides that are presented, you can download them from there. And then there's their bios. So you can learn a lot more about these incredible people by going there. All right. But so I first have the honor of introducing our presenter, Dr. Bonnie Goldstein. She is also co-host as the founder and clinical program director at Lifespan Learning, which is generously providing these CE courses with Maple. She's our current member and former chairman, my partner in crime at Maple's board of directors. And she is a psychologist working with clients in West Los Angeles. Welcome, Bonnie. And then next, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Elijah Goldstein. He is a best-selling author and a podcaster extraordinaire. You have to check it out. He's a clinical psychologist, founder of the Mindful Living Collective and the Center for Mindful Living and Psychotherapy in Los Angeles, along with his wife, Dr. Stephanie Goldstein. Thanks, Elijah. All right. And then last, we have our first presenter of the evening, Dr. Ronald Alexander. He's a clinical psychotherapist, author of 2 amazing books, and executive director of the Open Mind Training Institute in Santa Monica. Welcome, Dr. Ron.
Good evening to everybody, and want to welcome everybody to this wonderful panel and series of presentations. I want to jump right into a tiny bit of theory on trauma and somatic healing therapies, and I will also demonstrate some direct physiological exercises that one can do either with their clients and or for their own self-regulation, emphasizing working with the polyvagal nervous system. And then thirdly, I will instruct us in a mindful meditation and what I call a 4-part breathing exercise to move from an activated state of trauma to a more relaxed, calm, and resilient state. And moving from the trauma state to a state of resiliency is really important. And 3 cornerstones of somatic healing therapy. The first one is very important after there's been a shock trauma, is to orient the individual to the here and now and to make contact with them. And the best way to do that, of course, is to ask them to look around the room and to find something that they can focus upon that gives them a feeling of calm, abiding, a soothing quality, or a feeling of safety. And if there's a window in your office, or if you're doing this at your own home, looking out the window at the blue sky or at nature is very, very important for grounding a healing, safe state in your body's physiology. Because trauma both lives in the body and it lives in the nervous system. And what we want to do is to assist you to shuttle between a state of safety and comfort to a state of relaxation, to healing, and to exploration of what it is that you're experiencing as a result of the trauma that you've experienced. And what we do in somatic experiencing is we do a lot of what we call titrating and shuttling between the state of safety and comfort, a very small amount of time, a minute or two, into the activated and hyper-aroused state of the trauma state, and then back to what we call the healing vortex, the quality of comfort, safety, and engaged relaxation for the mind, body, and spirit system. So 3 quick cornerstones is: 1 is the orientation to the here and now. 2 is the pairing of attention with intention to both explore, to shift, and to transform from the trauma state to the healing state. And the best way that we do that is through attention to our breathing in our body. The third cornerstone of somatic trauma healing has to do with tracking the rhythm and the flow of physiological sensation first in the body. So what we say to the client, and if you're not a therapist and you're involved in this for your own self-healing process, is pay attention to what physiological sensations are you experiencing and where in your body. And second is what feelings are you aware of and present with, and where are they? And then third is where are the energy flows, and what we call in somatic experiencing therapy, as we refer to where emotion and feeling and sensation live, as streams or rivers, contours of affective states of experience, whether it be fear or anxiety or anger or rage. Or we also invite the client to have an experience of activating something that's positive or wholesome. And since this is directed to the community, and particularly for those of us who've just lived through a month, and many of us are still, who are in the Santa Monica Mountains like myself, are still living through the trauma of the fires, and now we're living through the trauma of floods and mudslides. So it's really, really important that before you engage a client or a friend or a family member who may have lost their home in the fire, or that they were recently in a car accident. And again, we refer to this in the domain, in the realm of shock trauma. And for tonight, we don't have time, but perhaps the three of us will do a part 2 on what's also called developmental trauma. And we'll do a deeper dive into more clinical theory behind all of the skills and methods that we're going to share with you. So these contours or streams or rivers of affect are really, really important to follow. And the best way that we do that is we pair attention with the intention to learn, to shift, to transform, to grow, and to open. And that is through the breath. So I wanted to go through the second slide first. And I'd like to invite everybody to take their shoes off and actually stand up with me. And we're going to go to the next slide. And the reason that I'm taking you through these very direct somatic trauma healing exercises is because they all work on strengthening the immune system and bringing you offline of the sympathetic nervous system of fight, flight, freeze, or shutdown, and bringing online the parasympathetic nervous system, and particularly both the dorsal and the vagal nervous system. So a way of, in the dorsal part of the parasympathetic nervous system, is you might want to think about that as it starts at the top of the head, and the nervous system goes all the way down the back and the base of the spine. And we often refer to that as the dorsal break, so that there's a trauma and you go into either fight, flight, freeze, or into shutdown. And so we want to bring you out of that state of shutdown. And the first exercise is the following. And this is to engage the dorsal vagal system and to free up the trapped energy, the blocked energy of the trauma. So the very first thing that you want to do is take your hands and put them on your hips, and starting rotating your hips to the left in a very slow movement, as if you were making a circle. And at the same time, lightly and slightly bend your knees so that, as I said, with your shoes off, you can actually feel a sense of connection and ground to the floor, to Mother Earth. And then what you want to do is you want to go in the opposite direction from right to left, gently moving the hips, which is what this is doing, is it's bringing online the dorsal vagal system, and it's allowing you to come slowly out of the freeze state. Okay, next exercise in somatic experiencing therapy is, we call it the emergency repair exercise. It's very, very important that before someone starts to tell you about, let's say that they recently lost their home or their office in the fires, is to just say, oh, great, wonderful, but let's just slow things down for a moment. And then do that orientation exercise about having them activate safety, comfort, and calm abiding first. And then invite them into taking their right hand and putting it under their left armpit, and their left hand under their right armpit. And then suggest to them, and we're standing now, but most of the time we work with some of these exercises sitting down, particularly if you're doing therapy and or you're self-regulating at home. So what you want to do is you instruct the person, whether they're standing up or they're sitting down, is to gently bend their knees, again, to facilitate that experience of feeling grounded and feeling connected to the earth. And in Zen, and in Japan, we refer to this experience of grounding as connecting to the Dantian, which is down here at the navel point. So you take the right palm, put it under the left armpit, and the left palm and put it under the right armpit. And then close your eyes and begin to breathe long, slow, and deep, so that you breathe in 4 breaths into the nose, the abdomen, 2 breaths, and then 2 breaths up into the lungs. And then you hold the breath for the count of 6. And then the opposite of the in-breath, the out-breath, is you'll be breathing out through your mouth in a bit of a whoosh sound. So you breathe all the way out. And then this is really important, is hold the breath for 1, 2, 3, 4 breaths. And then begin again to breathe in, 2 breaths, extending your abdomen out, and then 2 breaths up into the lungs. And then again, we're going to hold the breath for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then blow all the breath out through the mouth. And then relax your hands. And then just allow yourself to move your body left to right, right to left. And then the next exercise that's really, really important for activating and shifting from the dorsal brake to activating the ventral vagal system, which has to do with rest, digest, relaxation, and healing. And one can also say, and sleep, resting very deeply. And so what we want to do is take your hands and put them right out from the chest, because the ventral vagal system is from the top of the head all the way down the front side of your body physiology. The ventral vagal nervous system runs down the front part. So take your hands and have your palms facing together. And on the in-breath, you're going to breathe into the nose and extend your hands and arms where you're opening up the chest and the shoulders are actually going all the way back. And then you're going to exhale and bend forward and bring the palms of the hands together. And then inhale, extend up, and then exhale out to the mouth and bend forward. And do that 2 or 3 more times, because this is bringing online the ventral vagal system so that you can move from the dorsal system of braking, of fight, flight, freeze, and shutdown into opening, so that there are somatic flows of energy flowing through the body. So once again, you breathe in, everything goes back. Then breathe all the way out to the mouth, everything goes forward. Next slide. And the last exercise that we're going to do is I want you to bend your knees, put your hands on your hips, close the eyes, and once again, find the in-breath, breathing into the nose, long, slow, and deep. And then you breathe all the way out to the mouth. And as you're breathing in, and you can have your eyes closed But if anybody gets triggered from trauma from closing their eyes, you can have the eyes fully open. And so as you're breathing in long, slow, and deep, just mentally repeat this lovely phrase, receiving comfort. And then as you breathe out through the mouth, mentally repeat the phrase, letting go, allowing. So as you breathe in through the nose, long, slow, and deep, receiving comfort. And as you breathe out through the mouth, letting go and allowing. And then bring the palms of your hands together at what we call the heart center of the Namaste position. Just do a gentle bow and come sitting back down. And in keeping and honoring the time commitment, I'll sign off here and open up the stage to Dr. Bonnie Mark.
Hi, everybody. It is so beautiful that we have been able to come together like this. And Ron, the way you were able to start us and get us into a place of comfort and full body and breath awareness. One of the questions people will say is, why is it that this body stuff is so important? And I imagine many of us have experienced in the last month, those of us who've been in LA, the idea that when you start talking about the trauma, be it the fires or being worried about evacuation, or with you, Ron, you left your house not knowing if it would be back. And that wasn't for Ron a new experience, because in 1993, he had a similar experience with the fires. Both times we were lucky your house remains. But for so many of our clients, that's not the case. And as they start speaking with me, we can see the activation. It's as though the words are causing their bodies to get activated, and you can watch and you can feel that. And as I see that, I'll often say, let's hold on a second. Let's just take a minute to ground ourselves. Let's just take a minute to be here, to be present, as all of you are tonight. And now that we're all sitting again, thank you for waking us up by having us stand, Ron. As we sit, let's focus for a second on grounding, what grounding means to us. Because it's the foundation, the terra firma, the very ground upon which we stand, or our houses, or our community that is gone. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. I've always been working here in Los Angeles. And I can say this is an unimaginable experience of worry, loss, because the very thing that we know to do as therapists, and certainly as a sensory motor or somatic psychotherapist, is to take a breath. And yet that was the very thing I was being told, no, don't take a breath. It's dangerous. It's toxic. Be careful. Wear a mask. All of those messages that we were getting. So we forget to breathe and we forget to ground ourselves. And if what I'm saying sounds familiar, let's just take a minute to ground ourselves now. As you're sitting and listening, let your feet go onto the ground and feel what happens inside your body as you let yourself ground, as you let yourself feel that sense that the very earth upon which we stand, or the seats upon which our body is aligned, is able to be comforted by being able to do this. In fact, as I'm sitting, I'm feeling my alignment shift. And that's something that I've found with our clients, helping them to think about what's happening right here, right now with their alignment. Ron did something so beautiful with the arms open and the arms closed. And when I see my clients talk and I see their head comes in and they start to curl and they're not even aware of it, I might pull out a mirror and say, hey, just take a look at what your body did as you were describing this awful, horrific devastation. And they're not aware of their body. So that's the first thing I will want to do, is bring them into awareness. And I'm always checking my body to make sure that I'm also resonating. Perhaps I'm mirroring. I might do something as Ron did, where I'll say, let's take a minute and open our arms. There's so much hot air going on. LA's an inferno on fire. Let's see what can we do with that? What can we imagine? And I'm thinking of, with one client, we took our hands into the air. We made a hot air balloon. Try it now, all of us. Let your hands go into the air. Just take in the energy. A hot air balloon is a reframe of this awful sensation. And let your body float up in the air. Maybe your eyes gaze in the air. Maybe your breath corresponds. I know I can take a very deep breath when my arms are open. And then let your hands drop. So much of what we just did, these movement exercises, are ones that you can guide your clients, but then you want to bring them into awareness, pointing out what's happening. We're constantly mirroring our clients, but we're also helping them to see, is there an unrest that's happening inside? I'll have clients that will say, oh, I am so weary, so tired. I don't even want to talk. And that's when I'll say, let's just feel our bodies. So I'm inviting all of you to take a minute right now and squeeze your arms really tight, even tighter than's comfortable. Just let all that tension go right into your arms and then let go. And notice the aftermath. If you were holding your arms up, let your arms drop into your lap. These little experiments of bringing our clients present, dropping into our bodies, can start often by doing one arm, squeezing, releasing, and then switching to the other arm. Try it with me now, squeezing, releasing, and couple your breath to it. And as Ron was speaking about with breath, that access route, taking in a breath, but then letting the breath out in a much longer exhale than the inhale, which is another way of triggering our sympathetic arousal system and relaxing us, helping us to drop in. Again, taking a breath in, really large breath. Maybe you're still squeezing. And then let your breath out. And then as you exhale, noticing the difference. I was working last week with a wonderful family. They lost everything. They said even going back to find out what was left was an impossibility for so long. And then their child, in the wisdom of an innocent 3-year-old child, said, it's raining now. It's raining in LA. The rain's going to put out our fires and then we can go home, right? And hearing that heartbreak and watching the mom's face as she realizes that she has to help the child grieve the loss, she has to grieve her own loss as well. And that's what we're doing. We're holding all of our clients and their losses. We're holding our own losses. And we're holding our community that in so many ways is coming together. When I think of what Maple Counseling Center has co-created, where we have the Briskin Wilder Welcome Center, they mobilized outreach for the community in a mobile truck going to the sites that are needing us, providing volunteer therapists, and our community responded. They said, here I am, I'm ready to help. It was something that we can do. And we know as therapists, as community members, taking any action, doing anything allows us to feel that sense that we're not as alone. There are handouts and slides that, instead of pulling them up now, I invite you to read them later, and we spend our last 5 minutes together before I turn this over for Elijah Goldstein to continue the dialogue. But there's this beautiful quote that I've been so drawn to by C.S. Lewis, the quote that friendship is born at that moment at which one person says to another, "What? You too? I'm not the only one?" I love the power of knowing that others are in our situations, whatever that may be. I'm reminded of when Bessel van der Kolk was speaking in Los Angeles about the research after 9/11 and the differential between post-traumatic stress, or 6 months after the trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, the difference between those who manifested that and those who didn't, he posited, was having someone to reach out to, having someone to extend an arm, to connect to. Viktor Frankl speaks about this in Man's Search for Meaning, how he was able to live through the devastation of the Holocaust and the concentration camps, knowing that he was waiting to reach out for and reconnect, that he had a meaning. And that's what I believe we are all becoming more aware of, that in these complicated times, we're needing one another. We're reaching out to one another, and we are serving as resources. So I want to bring your attention to one of the slides you'll look at later through the lens of sensory motor psychotherapy. We're calling it the Peace Resource Protocol, and the wisdom of Pat Ogden in creating, along with our team, a way of helping to consolidate concepts that Ron was speaking about and Elijah will be speaking about. The peace, the first one, P, is pause, pausing what you're doing. And for me, I often take my hand and I put it out like I'm doing now. Let's all do that. Take your hand and put it out, put it right into the screen so you can see me and see yourself doing that, as if I could reach out to you now and touch you. That pause is what we want to say to ourselves. And I'll put my hand right on my chest and take a breath. And that gives me a moment of pause before I continue down some of the spirals that might consume me, the spirals that are not helpful. Yet the somatic movement, putting my hand on my chest, brings me right into myself, or extending it brings me right into all of you who are part of this. You might be able to notice what's happening and identify what's happening in your body. And then the E of the Peace Protocol, embody a somatic resource, something that can help you. My go-to is always my hand on my chest, my resource of my breath, my taking a longer exhale, my becoming aware of my body, the squeezing, the coming together and knowing, the grounding, embodying those resources. And then the A of the Peace Protocol, acknowledging these positive effects on our body. And Ron, when you were teaching, I could feel myself shift. I was acknowledging, even before I started teaching, how much easier it would be because I'm here, I'm present, I'm with you all. And the C is the concentrating your attention on whatever's happening. If we can breathe out longer than our inhale for a full 15 seconds, letting our exhale help ground us, that helps us focus our attention and helps our concentration. And then, of course, the E is the engaging in the community, engaging in the environment. And Ron mentioned it, this orienting, this looking for what in our community, what in our room, what in our moment is helping us now. What are the smells and the tastes? What about the balance and the proprioceptive touching and reaching out, the pushing away? Right now, I'm leaning back into the couch. Some of these engaging with what's right there in the environment now. It can be a favorite pet. One of our CE webinars is one that I did on engaging in our animals and animal therapy, live and or non-alive stuffed animals, stuffies, for all ages. from the littlest child inside us that loves to hold on to a stuffy, to the adult in us that knows that we want to resource ourselves. So all of the things that I've gone over are in the handouts, including a whole list of somatic resources that you can invite in to let yourself feel the joy, feel the moment of resource. And the last one, as I come to a conclusion, is our vocal, to be able to not just let out a breath, but also to let out a sound with that breath. For me, Om comes to mind from my yoga practice. Some of my community members will say Shalom and let out a breath. It can be the Vu that some of you who are in the practice of mindfulness throughout the ages, any of the sounds that accompany the breath can help us to come into our body and into presence. And thank you all for being part of this. Let me turn this over to Elijah, who will continue.
Okay, thank you for that, Bonnie. No, I'm just like coming off of all of the between Ron and Bonnie, the physical movements and exercises, and also while you were talking, Bonnie, another thing that was coming to me because you mentioned maple a couple times, and I'm just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge everything that Maple Counseling does and what they put into the world. I mean, low cost therapy and these types of free CEs and even low cost everything. I mean, it's really a beautiful gift. And so thank you, Verena, for heading that and for everyone that works there. And I'm going to kind of bring us home a little bit and speak about a term that I've come to speak to a little bit more, which is this idea of emotional longevity. Emotional longevity is the idea of having emotional health and being able to support that with some level of consistency over time. And emotional health is our capacity to regulate our emotions, which in the face of the fires, in the face of supporting people, I know that if you are a therapist here, many of you are still supporting. I know I am supporting people who have lost their homes and who are still trying to find their way, and to be able to still find both the ability to not just regulate how they're feeling and find connection in a meaningful way, but also still be able to find the sense of contentment in various areas of life, like Bonnie was showing us, even Ron was showing us, even how to experience in our bodies. And then what I've been thinking a lot about lately is how when we're trying to be healthy in life, a lot of the science and a lot of the money goes to exercise, nutrition, and sleep, all cornerstones of being healthy. And what I've come to understand is that if you don't have your emotional health, it makes all of those a whole lot harder. And then when I started to look into the correlation between emotional health and our bodies, I started to see how and understand, and many of you maybe already know this, the real connection between how we pay attention. So Ron talked about intentionally paying attention or paying attention to our intention. And as we're doing that, we can start to become more aware of how we're feeling in any given moment and naming how we're feeling. And when we're doing that, we can start to regulate the stress that's there. And we know that as we're studied this, that prolonged stress elevates our cortisol. Cortisol is important for paying attention and getting going with things. But when it's chronic, then we start to notice some real physiological impact, like it begins to accelerate our aging. And that makes sense because when you're stressed chronically, your body's working overtime, and we only have so much life force in this body. And if we're overwhelmed constantly and dealing with stress constantly, and we don't know how to regulate that, or we don't have the tools to do that, even as like doctors and therapists, sometimes we're if you're in any of that, sometimes we're the most guilty of not really caring for ourselves. And so if we're holding people's stress and we're holding the weight of the emotions that are there, or if you're not a therapist here, it's important for you to know that not only does that accelerate aging, but there's also evidence that show that it damages the cells in our brain. It shortened. Alyssa Epel and Elizabeth Blackburn years ago spoke about the idea of how it shortens telomeres, these protective caps on the end of our DNA, and which are associated, longer telomeres associated with greater lifespan. And we also know that when we talk about emotional health, we're talking about our relationships, and studies show that when we have strong relationship, it reduces our mortality by about 50% versus loneliness, which increases our mortality. So I want to make the argument here that working with emotions, practicing being aware of our emotions, learning how to regulate our emotions, growing our emotional vocabulary, being able to name how it feels somatically and connect with it somatically, and being able to move towards and lean into and maybe hold our emotions in a way that's skillful or caring is going to have physiological correlates like reducing our blood pressure, reducing inflammation in our bodies, which is associated with disease and autoimmune disorders. And certainly, as we already know, improving cardiovascular health. So everything we're talking about here today, this ability of connecting with our bodies, and I love how Bonnie was talking about, grabbing our arms and squeezing them. And the reason I think some of that works, putting our hands on our chest, these somatic things, is because oftentimes, I don't know about you, but we're so much in our heads. We're thinking, and we are taking in more content right now by a greater complexity of inputs than ever before in human history. So we're fairly frazzled. And that's not even talking about what's happening in the world right now. The fires, the global wars, the economy, like everything that people are so concerned about right now, that even extend beyond the niche of what we're talking about here today, is vastly overwhelming. And when we feel overwhelmed in that way, that's when we start breaking down physiologically and our health span begins to shorten. And so it's up to us in some ways to recognize the connection between this mind and body. And if we want to live longer and better, then it's important to be able to come up with something and we do this if you're a therapist here. But I want to kind of share something that I've come up with that I think is very practical and simple and will translate some of the things we're talking about today in a memorable way. So there's a method that I've developed called the 4R framework, and I'm just going to kind of name it here just so you have a sense of it, and it's also in the document in the PDF, so you have all that. You don't need to remember everything I'm saying here, but I'm going to tell you each step. I'm going to tell you the science behind it briefly, why we're doing that, and just really how you can implement it. And all of this can be done without some big overhaul, some giant effort. It's really in the small moments of our lives that we use what I'm going to talk about, and that can support us in reducing the pressure and the overwhelm and refocusing on things that are going to support our emotional health and longevity. Okay, so the first thing that, and many of you know this, and certainly Ron and Bonnie speak to this quite a bit, but this ability of recognizing when we're caught in a state of something that's we all maybe know here is called the emotional loop. This idea of feeling off kilter, overwhelmed, imbalanced. Emotionally, we might be having certain thoughts that are negative or catastrophizing, like a runaway train in a lot of ways. Our body's going into that fight, flight, freeze. or as Ron says, shutdown response. That's the physiological correlate, or feeling certain emotions like anxiety or overwhelm or sadness or grief or these types of feelings that are here. The importance of recognizing that, otherwise known as labeling or noting, what that does is that, and we've seen is kind of, and Matthew Lieberman out of UCLA has done studies on this, both with fear of arachnophobia, fear of spiders, and also just kind of labeling faces, emotions. When we name that, we bring more blood flow to the prefrontal region. We down-regulate the activity in the amygdala. So we have a little bit more impulse control, emotion regulation, and space to do what, and Bonnie talked about Viktor Frankl, to do what the quote that's been attributed to him speaks to: between stimulus and response, there's a space. Everyone here can probably continue that quote by themselves. In that space, there's choice, possibility, and freedom. So noting, recognizing how we're feeling or what's present for us can allow us to step into that space. But that space is typically never enough. We can't just notice how we're feeling and do anything about it. This is where the sensory motor psychotherapy comes in. This is where the what Ron's talking about comes in, where we're now coming into our bodies and we're noticing where we're holding that emotion, where we're holding that overwhelm. And for me, there's a next step, which is the step of release. So what releasing does is it widens the space between stimulus and response. So now we can begin to do something. So what's a release? A simple thing like what Bonnie talked about, where you're kind of squeezing your arms and you're kind of feeling maybe a little release from that. The simplest one for me is where I notice my shoulders and I just put them down. It's not meant to be a big thing. It's a very small thing to do, but it's just enough to widen that space. And then another thing could just be kind of shake it out, just kind of some form of release. Deep breath in, release. And I even say in my mind, release, as I exhale. There's a great song by Pearl Jam called Release Me. You can also listen to that song. that'll also support that as well. So release widens that space between stimulus and response so that we can refocus now. Now, there's a great quote that's out there that says, wherever our focus goes, energy flows. Neuroscientists might say, and that's the way the brain grows. So we're now refocusing. What are we refocusing on? What's one small thing that can support me in this moment? Or maybe it's a new question. What's something that I need right now? What's something that I'm needing right now? Or what's a tiny shift I can make that can make a difference for me in this moment? And maybe it's reaching out a connection with someone. Maybe it's taking a little bit more time with the somatic work that's there. Maybe it's talking with someone. But it gives you enough space to have the wherewithal to do that. The reason you insert a question in the refocus is because when you ask your brain a question, it does the same thing that ChatGPT does. It searches for an answer, or Google does, and it comes up with an answer. If you ask yourself what's wrong with you, it's going to tell you all the things that are wrong with you. What's wrong with the world, it's going to tell you all the things that are wrong with the world. If you ask yourself, what's a tiny shift I can make to support myself in this moment? Different answers will arise. And so we have to recognize, release, refocus. Once we refocus and begin to apply what that is, we come into a state of renewal. What's renewal? Renewal is when I'm feeling a little bit stronger. I have access to strength that wasn't there before. And now I'm feeling a little bit more grounded, a little bit more fortitude within myself, or I'm feeling a little bit lighter, or I'm feeling a little bit more loving towards myself. Whatever we mixed into that refocus, we now have. And so now we come into a state of renewal. And so we recognize, release, refocus, renew. It's a very simple, yet incredibly powerful practice that we can bring into these moments of our lives. And I'll just kind of mention this one thing because I'm aware of our time. Recently, I was Facebook scammed. It was I had no idea. It was so intricate. I was invited by a celebrity to be part of some kind of panel, this thing. It's not out of the blue that something like that can happen. And so I wasn't like taken off guard by it, but needless to say, I'll kind of fast forward. They needed to be set up something in Facebook. I went into Facebook and they had me kind of noodle with some stuff in there that allowed them to come in and kind of take over my whole Facebook. I had this whole shame spiral that I fell into. What's wrong with me? How could I do that? I thought I was too smart for that. How did I fall into this? What an idiot I am. All this stuff, all this shame came to me. And I recognize at some point, and all the anxiety and fear, by the way, are they going to steal my identity? Who that knows what's happening, right? Anxiety, fear, shame. And so I recognized that at some point, I lowered my shoulders. I went on a walk because that's what I needed. I just need to get out. It's so wonderful that I work on this work because I said, I got to really apply this to myself. I started noticing as I applied it to myself, all this massive self-critical voices that were coming, as I started noticing them and naming them, it started turning into sadness. I started feeling sad that I got so messed with. And I started walking and felt this sadness that was there, a little self-critic, but calming down a little bit. And then I started applying because I could refocus now. I could refocus on, can I be kinder to myself? Yes, we hear this in the self-compassion world, right? Can I be kinder to myself? But I thought, yeah, you know what? I can. I don't need to be so hard on myself. Fast forward, I said that began to soften. I was going to pick up my son from school. I pick him up. My sadness turned into anger now. Now I'm really angry. So I'm aware of these transitions of emotions happening. Anger happened. I'm so angry now. And how could they do this to me? And, and which was healthier, anger out versus anger in, healthier. And then we get to he's starving. I'm bringing him to this practice. We go and stop at Starbucks to get his favorite scones. And a guy comes in and I'm feeling kind of, I'm still feeling that anger, and this guy comes behind us, slams his beans on the counter and says to the woman across the counter, I want new beans. These beans are terrible. And she said, oh, sir, did you have your receipt? He goes, I knew you would ask me for that receipt and I don't like the tone of your voice. And he was bullying her. He was bullying her. And there I was in my feeling kind of angry a little bit already. And so I turned to him and I said, hey man, you need to settle down. And I felt really constructive with that because he was out of line and being and bullying this woman. Needless to say, he settled down a little bit, and then she gave us an extra scone because someone was supporting her. So there I was with my anger. I was aware of it. Because I was aware of it, I was able to use it constructively in that situation, so much so that the other person appreciated it and gave us a scone. I walked out kind of a little smiling and laughing. I turned to my son because we want to always do that with our kids. I know our time is up. And I said, well, what did you notice? How was that for you? He said, well, you sure spoke what you had to say. And he sure settled down. I'm like, oh, that's right. He did. And I'm like, are you enjoying your extra scone? He goes, oh, yeah. And so there it is, the whole thing in action. Recognize, release, refocus, was able to refocus, shift out of my emotional spiral that I was in, be aware of what was also really there as things shifted and be able to use it constructively to come into a place of renewal. And we can use this with ourselves and our personal lives to make things simple, because I'll end with this. In the state of overwhelm that many of us are in right now, and our clients are in, or people we work with are in, we need something simple. It can't be overly complex. The somatic work that Bonnie's talking about and the practices that Ron's talking about, these are simple practices that we can bring into our lives to make big shifts. And so, but we're just trying them on. And so I wanted to thank Bonnie and Ron for everything, the gifts that they're bringing. And may you be able to use this in a way that supports you in the same way through this time.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. All right, now I have a pleasure bringing everybody on. Please join me. And the first question is actually a really beautiful segue from what you just ended with, Dr. Goldstein. It's from Anonymous, and it's, if you could talk a little bit about if someone has gone through something this devastating and is really needing to be seen and heard, and then you start talking about breath work, let's say, or body, or hug yourself. What do you do as a therapist if they don't respond to it as helpful? What if it feels like that's them not being seen or heard? Why are you talking about breath work from your beautiful home? How would you respond? Anyone, any of you?
Well, I want to just start by saying they may be very right. I cannot imagine a lot of the trauma that clients have. I know my own trauma. I have my own, when Elijah, you spoke about the shame spiral, I know what it feels like to go down my own shame spiral, that massive self-critical. But I think I would acknowledge that. And I would say, I can't imagine what you were going through, but I want to understand and I want to be here for you. And I want to find resources that work for you. And if breath work isn't the right access route, if breathwork is wrong, thank you for letting me know that. Let's work together and find something that's right. And I'm thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that basic shelter and food trumps everything else. But I would match that with knowing that they're not alone, knowing that we want to be there and learn from them ways we can help them. That's what comes to mind.
I would be aligned with them and actually personally share. I'm a lot more self-transparent when I'm doing therapy than in the presentation because of the efficiency of the time. But I would say the fire came 5 minutes on all three sides of my home. And I was horrified and I was in shock for the entire week. And as Bonnie said, I called a variety of my friends, and most of them are all therapists, and I would say, I don't feel anything, or I'd alternate from not feeling anything, numb, shut down, to feeling just panicked and overwhelmed with anxiety at the horror of, I'm about to lose everything, and there's nothing I can do. So I would address the issue of, well, why are we doing breath work? Also with what got me personally through the whole week, because they didn't even send to Topanga Canyon. They didn't send the firefighters or the big airplanes or the helicopters to us until Saturday, when I actually called the Lost Hills Sheriff's Department and said, we got the fire. It's 5 minutes from our neighborhood. We need help. But all during the week, I kept practicing morning, midday. Lots of patients canceled because of the fires. Before dinner, the breath exercises, and I found them grounding and healing for me, so that as I continued the next week with working with 5, 6, 7 different couples came in, they lost everything. I was more centered and connected, so I could be really with them. And then they were open, because almost everybody said, can you teach me something? Can you give me something? Because I've just lost everything. And so I think there's an importance of not being psychoanalytic and blank screen, and being very present and very open with our own personal pain and horror, but then giving them something that they can practically apply that I know worked for me during the week.
Beautiful.
I-
We have a
Well, I just
Elijah?
want to say that I hear the pain behind a comment of how teaching breath work when someone's lost everything feels so incongruent. There's like a dissonance. And I just want to be clear, I don't think anybody here would say that when somebody walked in their office after losing everything, because each one of us here are currently working with a number of people who have lost everything. And there would never be a situation where someone would walk in and you'd say, let me teach you breath work. Like that's not, none of us are saying that. And none of us are saying that here. So I want to first acknowledge the deep pain of and grief and ongoing grief of the loss of losing everything. And this was more what was being shared here was more aligned, I think, what Ron or Bonnie was saying, but about when there's a need for regulation and support with the regulation of it, of the internal trauma that's happening, or the dysregulation that's happening because of the enormous amount of things that have to happen to even find a place to live. Even if you do find a place to rebuild everything again, and your whole world, the neighborhood, people you knew there, everything is gone. The enormous grief of that needs to first be met and sat with. And of course, as a therapist, you're going to meet the person where they're at. And if and when the entryway is for, okay, let's help you move through this in a more grounded way so you can face the enormity of all this, then that's when you would step in with these types of tools and support. And it's important and helpful to have these during that time. But just wanted to name that so there wasn't a misunderstanding of what was being said here with what would be the approach with somebody who has lost everything, which clearly one person here was commented for you. And to just see you for that. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I want to point out it's 8 o'clock. This was a 1-hour course, but it's so hard if we have all three of you together and we only got one question in. And so this would be a moment where anybody that needs to leave, please leave. We'll send you the recording. But if you all don't mind, maybe just take one more question. Everybody here? Okay, great. All right. So let's see. They're both sort of somatic questions. So I'm going to see if Fred Rosen asked one. I'm going to see if I can combine. In somatic therapy, how important is it to relive the traumatic event? And Anonymous also noticed that somatic exercises make them very emotional and always cry. Does that mean that they are holding some unknown trauma? So actually, I snuck in 2 questions. But so how important is it to relive the trauma? And if a lot of emotions come up, does that mean that that person is holding on to unprocessed, unknown trauma?
Well, through the lens of sensory motor psychotherapy, we're working to titrate the emotions, the responses. How much is too much emotion is based on the person. If someone cannot cope with any emotion, then the slightest amount, even just a little sliver, like a sliver of a new moon of emotion, that might be enough at that moment. And we're working to expand their window of tolerance, that the window that Dan Siegel has taught so many of us about, this staying within a very narrow window where I can't handle more than one more moment of this, and then I will shut down and dissociate, or I will become so emotional I can't be present. And we work to dance. It's a dance step, but we're doing it collaboratively. I would say that's my way of answering that. What about the others? What do you think?
I would say that constricted or held back tears or any affect, any emotion as it's being released doesn't necessarily always go to trauma. Sometimes it's just simply there's a holding in or a holding back, and then there's a letting go. And so there's a continuum from a shock trauma state, developmental trauma, and then there's a whole host of affective experiences on the psychological continuum. And like holding back tears, and then all of a sudden, sometimes we're in a movie theater, or sometimes we're out walking and I start crying. That doesn't mean it's connected to a trauma. And I think that did Fred Rosen ask that? Good question, yeah. Fred.
He asked, is how important is it to relive the traumatic event in somatic therapy?
That would take the next hour. But,
that's our next webinar.
Right.
That's true.
Both sensory motor, and I know with Elijah, since we've written together, we actually wrote for the first textbook on mindfulness and psychotherapy from Harvard University. We wrote a chapter called Mindfulness, Trauma, and Trance, Insights into Buddhist Psychology and Mindfulness. It is not necessary, and it's actually at times destructive, to take somebody into reliving a trauma, even if they ask you to. What is most important in both sensory motor and mindfulness and somatic experiencing trauma treatment is the downregulation in the deactivation of the energy that the trauma causes to create constriction, restriction, and that's really the core of the trauma. The trauma is what happens as an event, and all traumas are horrible; they're awful. But it's what happens afterwards with the nervous system and our cellular physiology that is the long-term negative side effect. So taking someone back into the trauma can be re-triggering, and it can be counterproductive to the actual mind-body spiritual healing process. Elijah?
No, I think you said it really well. Yeah.
Okay, and there we have Rick Sachs who asked for some recommendations for books on somatic theory and exercises. So that's something we can send out in our follow-up email. And with that, it's 8:05. So I just want to thank you all so very much for supporting the clinical community in Los Angeles, as all of you out there are, I can't imagine there's one of you that doesn't have someone that you're having to support right now, if you yourself are not actually impacted as well. So hopefully there's some nuggets that you can take away and integrate in. And I thank you all, you brilliant doctors, for doing this with Maple Counseling. And I'm just going to quickly do some wrap-ups. I want to thank Lifespan Learning and Bonnie, of course, for co-hosting. I want to remind everybody you have to complete the survey. So follow the prompts and the emails. I believe there's a link in the resources section. I'll wave goodbye to all of you as we sort of pop off. It's so magical. And you need to do that within 7 days in order to get your CE certification for the one continuing education unit credit you can get for this course. Please also, I have to say this, but consider donating whatever your heart feels called to support Maple's ongoing mission in the community, but also this really beautiful continuing education course series that we're offering to support therapists. And also, make note, our very next one is coming up on March 21st. It's going to be taught by Dr. Lisa Firestone on preventing teen suicide. A very important topic and unfortunately very timely. And that's it. So everyone, have a beautiful Thursday night. Thank you so much for coming.